topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Welcome to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV, where we bring you educational information from top local experts in the fields of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. Now sit back and listen to experts in family law, association law, hearing loss, business brokers, home care, along with many other topics. Now here are your hosts, Steve-O and Sophia.
Hey, good afternoon, Bay Area. Welcome to another Ask the Expert show where we bring you the top experts in the field of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. We have got a great guest for you today. We had received so many emails from you saying, how come you don't do a show on tax relief? And basically, I don't even know why, because we do tax relief in most of our markets and we have great experts, but really important, you got to make sure you have the right person. There's a lot of people out there who claim to be tax relief experts, but there's only a handful in the whole United States. We've found one that is absolutely, well, I'm going to just say this to you. If you get into a situation with the IRS, first of all, you don't want to handle it yourself, but you want to you want to reach out to our guest. Let me introduce you to attorney Stephen Moskowitz. Good afternoon, Stephen.
Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
You have no idea. I am so glad you and I have talked a lot back and forth, and I am so happy that you're going to be our expert for not only the Northern California area, but also for the New York area.
From whence I came.
You have another show coming on. First of all, before we get started, tell everybody about your practice and about yourself.
Well, thank you. I'm a tax attorney, and before I was a tax attorney, I was a CPA, and I have a laundry list of advanced credentials. And also, before I was a tax attorney CPA, I had a very prestigious job in New York City in transportation. I was a New York City taxi cab driver.
Okay.
The reason I bring that up is I'm really a simple guy. And the first thing that I like is old-fashioned lawyering, where here's the very first thing we do when you come in the office. We listen to you.
Surprise.
Well, yes, it's not like here's the pre-printed form, put in your name and address, and that's your plan. We listen to you. And that's so vitally important, because if I represented twins, one sibling with identical financial situations, identical tax situations, the two plans could be the polar opposites, because their wishes, desires, wants, needs can be very, very different. So we listen to you. And then we do everything in tax. And then what we do is we go to the government and we want to cut you a sweet deal that gets you what you want. And people don't realize there's so many advantages, and there's so much opportunities in tax planning. And I'm already thinking forward to some of our other shows where I'm going to show you how much you can save by doing tax planning. Because I looked, and one of the things that motivated me to become a tax attorney was, before I was a tax attorney, before I set foot in law school on day one as a student, I already had a master's and bachelor's degree in accounting. I was already a practicing CPA, working for a big fancy firm whose clients were the Fortune 500. It boggled me how much money they made and how little they paid in taxes. And that's what I say when I take on a new client. I say, so, Mr. or Ms. New Client, You think you make more or less than Apple Computer? We all laugh as well. Apple Computer makes more than I do. I said, well, guess what? You pay more taxes than Apple. Then the laughing stops, and then we want to prevent what I call March Madness. You say, Steve, what do you have against college basketball? Absolutely nothing. March Madness that's around the time people are mad about their taxes, saying, why do I have to pay so much and the big boys pay so little? So that's just a teaser for the upcoming show, because as you know, I'm also a radio and TV person myself. I've been on the radio for a long time, and I've also been a TV legal analyst for 17 years, 7 years on Fox, 10 years NBC, and even longer on the radio. So that's the little teaser to get you to keep coming back for future appearances. But today we're going to talk about a very common situation. What do you do when you have a tax bill that you just can't pay?
Great topic. I want to ask you one thing before we get started, Stephen. Is it true if you put that letter from the IRS unopened in that drawer that it really doesn't disappear?
It doesn't disappear. And one of the things I always kept in my desk was a letter opener, because although I don't open the company mail, so many clients would walk in with a stack of envelopes and say, I just couldn't bear to open them. So I'd open them, see what it was. And, that's really not a good idea, not opening, because you have all kinds of rights, but a lot of your rights have an expiration date on them. And it's a real shame when you open it. Oh, you see this letter here? Boy, this could have done wonderful things to help you. Too bad you missed it. So, we have to open everything. But basically what we want to do, and what we've done in the cases, and we've done this for so many years, we take over for you. So we don't want you to have to talk to the IRS, deal with them, have anything to do with them. We do the whole job. And we're about cutting you a sweet deal. And first thing a lot of times people ask is, well, how could I owe so much? How could I possibly owe so much, Steve? And the answer to that is, maybe you don't. Lots of mistakes are made on both sides. IRS, people certainly make plenty of mistakes. IRS makes lots and lots of mistakes. So the very first thing we do, we investigate, and that's where, again, having both the tax law and accounting background, it's not just, the theory that we understand the theories of law. We actually understand the forms and the number crunching too, how it all comes together. And the bottom line, it's like with a new lawyer, he may know some law, but where's the courthouse? So we know where the courthouse is too. And the bottom line is, the first thing we do is, does the client really owe this amount of money? And if they don't, we go to the government and say, hi, please correct your records, because you say my client owes X, but he really doesn't owe X, he only owes Y, which is a lot less. Common reasons for this. Another show we're going to do is about people that don't file tax returns for years. Very common. The number one reason people don't file tax returns is just a plain old simple, they didn't have the money to pay. So they didn't file the return, they made a mistake. Then the second year rolls around and they say, well, how can they file year 2 when they didn't file year 1? By the way, they still don't have the money. And all of a sudden, years have passed and they're living like criminals, looking over their shoulders. Is the IRS coming to get me today? Now, there's 2 punishments when you don't file a return. It's a crime. The government can put you in prison for 1 year for every year you don't file, up to 6 years. That's why Wesley Snipes went to prison for 3 years, because although he beat his tax evasion charge, he didn't file 3 tax returns, and the judge gave him 3 years in federal prison.
Wow, I remember that.
But a very, very, very common punishment is on the civil side. And on the civil side, what happens is when you don't file the return, oftentimes the government makes one up for you. You don't want them to do that. They have a special name for it. It's called an SFR, substitute for return, where they do their very best to make up something that's a lot more than you really owe. And there's lots of ways they do that. For example, if you sold a house for $1 million, it cost you $1.2 million, or you had exemptions because it's your personal residence and you don't owe any tax on it, The government doesn't know or care about that part. It's okay, tax on a mill. Same way with earnings. Same way, or sometimes you just make something up, guess at it. So the bottom line is step one is what does the client really owe, if anything? And if they don't owe the full amount, we go to the government and we say, hey, look, my guy doesn't owe this. You got to correct your records. Here's why. Another thing that we do is let's assume we've done that, and let's say the person really does owe a bunch of money. The government automatically puts penalties on you. It's not like you think of a judge where you stand before a judge and you tell him or her your story and the judge decides to punish you or not. The computer automatically puts all these penalties on. Well, you don't have to just pay them. You can contest them, but you have to know that. Knowledge really is power. You have to know, you have to contest these things. So what happens here? For example, we talk about people that don't file tax returns. The failure to file penalty is 25% of the tax.
Wow.
Then there's another penalty, failure to pay. That goes up every month till that's also 25%. Then you add interest on top of both of those. And sometimes people wind up owing more in penalties and interest than they do in tax. And there's lots of other penalties too, but we won't go into them today.
How do they get out of that kind of hole?
We go to the government and we ask them to forgive the penalties. And there's a lot of good reason. Suppose, Steve, you were kind enough to invite me to your house tomorrow night for dinner. And I say, I'll be there at 8:00. And you say, terrific. And you spend the entire day preparing a gourmet meal. And 8:00, you don't hear the ring of the bell. And 8:15 and 8:30 and 9 and 10:00, I don't show up and you don't hear from me. Would you be angry at me? Probably would, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And you probably wouldn't invite me over again, would you?
No.
So my penalty would be I don't get to be invited to your house for dinner again. But suppose a month later I called you up and said, Steve, I'm so sorry. I was on my way to your house when a drunk hit me and I've been in a coma in the hospital for a month. And the first thing I did when I woke up, I said, nurse, quick, hand me a phone. I got to call Steve-O. You wouldn't be mad at me anymore, would you?
Yeah, that's true.
Now you understand penalty forgiveness. What was your reason? There's a lot of good reasons. For example, a medical problem. That's for the person or a close family member. So you have, say, husband, wife, and kids. What if the kid was really sick? That's a good reason. And other things. The government recognizes substance abuse problems, drugs, alcohol, even gambling problems, or something else, unexpected business problems. And you just basically go and tell the truth, much like, hey, I'm sorry I didn't show up for your house at 8:00. Here's why. You tell your story, and the government forgives a lot of penalties. But if you don't say something, that's not going to happen. If you don't say something, they automatically put the penalty on you. And there's so many people that just say, well, it's the IRS. They must be right. You can't do anything about it. Just pay it. No, that's not the case. We still live in a democracy, and there's still so much that we can do. So that's the first thing that we take a look at. Now, the next thing you say is, okay, it's great you got my penalties off, but I still owe a bunch of money. I just can't pay it. What do we do now? There's a lot of good options. The first one we take a look at is something called offer and compromise.
Okay.
Offer and compromise is we offer government to pay in part, a small part as possible, and they forgive the rest. Steve-O, it just goes away. Imagine if you owe the government $1 million and they said, okay, we'll take 10 grand and all's forgiven, or any other number. So the bottom line is, that's the first thing we look to is, do you qualify for an offer and compromise? Now, there's 3 different ways that you can wind up qualifying for offer and compromise. The first one is doubt as to collectability. That's what it's called. And that's where you say, yeah, I owe you the $1 million. I just don't have the assets or the income. For example, I represented a stockbroker who was making about 600 grand a year. And he got in a little trouble. And he was always behind 1 year in taxes. He did something you're not supposed to do, what a lot of people do. He didn't pay his taxes in year one. Just didn't. But in year two, he took his income from year two and he paid the taxes from year one. So he was 1 year behind.
Yes.
Unfortunately, he got fired and he couldn't be a stockbroker anymore. So he went from being a $600,000 a year stockbroker to a $24,000 a year cabbie. How could he possibly pay the taxes on a $600,000
There's no way.
The answer is no way.
Yeah.
So basically, we cut him a deal based on his earnings of $24,000 a year. So the first thing you take a look at, what's the assets of the taxpayer? What's the income? And if you have insufficient income, and a lot of times what happens in reality is this goes on for years. People really do owe substantial amounts, and they just can't pay a substantial amount on a middle class income. And, you know, a lot of middle class people have middle class houses and middle class lives and middle class kids, and they're spending a lot on groceries. I mean, everything's so expensive today. So the bottom line is that's the first ground. I don't have sufficient income or assets. And we work on the valuations of assets if you have them. And that's a very good way and most common way of getting out of this. Now, what if you say, what if Billy Gates sees your show and says, you know, that guy Steve Moskowitz, I'd like him to help me out because I'd like to do an offer and compromise here. I say, well, Billy, you're a multi-billionaire, so we're probably not going to get you out on the doubt as to collectability because you have lots of assets and income. But something that Billy Gates could do is something called doubt as to liability. What doubt as to liability is that you say you don't owe the money. This will work for a multi-billionaire because you say, okay, I got a tax bill for something and I'm contesting it. I don't owe it. And then you can contest it. And then there's a third ground, which is very nice. And it's very nebulous, very subjective, when it would be unfair for the taxpayer to pay tax. So what is unfair? What are you talking about? Well, suppose we have this situation. Suppose we have somebody that, and again, the grounds here depends on your facts and circumstances, but suppose you had this situation. You have somebody that has a good amount of money in the bank, has some good earnings, but they're also very sick and they need a lot of meds that are not covered by insurance. And you can say, well, you know what? Yes, they have assets of X and income of Y, but that money is needed to buy the medicine. If the tax, and it's not covered by insurance. If the taxpayer doesn't have this medicine, they will literally die. Or you have somebody, maybe that's a little elderly or infirm and they're in an assisted living facility. And the monthly fee for that is X. And although they have money in the bank, based on the person's age and their life expectancy, they're going to need all that money for the payments. And the story there is that if you take my client's money, they'll throw him out of the old age home and he'll literally die in the street. So
do they care about that?
Yes. You know, I know everybody has this image of the IRS as a heartless bureaucratic monster. But what you have to remember is institutions don't exist. The organization of the IRS is not a walking, breathing monolith monster. It's an assemblage of human beings. And we're not going up against the IRS. That doesn't exist. We're going up against a representative, a human being of the IRS. And, you know, you say, well, look, you know, mom's in the old age home and she's of advanced age and she needs these meds and they'll throw her in the street and she'll die. Yeah, a lot of people really do care. So like any large group, IRS agents, lawyers, doctors, you name any large group, If you look at a bell-shaped curve, there's a few really good ones, just saints. There's a few monsters. Those are the tail ends of the bell-shaped curve. And most people are in the middle, just normal human beings doing their job. And what I found over the years, if you're reasonable with them, they'll be reasonable with you. A lot of people aren't. And what you don't even think about is that a lot of people don't even speak to the IRS rationally. Of course, as a tax attorney, I do not condone in any way, shape, or form any kind of violence on anything. Clearly, we're a system of laws. We sit down and we talk in a conversational tone. But statistically, the IRS is less than 1% of the federal civilian workforce, but they account for over 50% of the physical attacks on federal workers. I mean, there are some people that actually get physical. So a lot of people, if you're an IRS agent, you might not be dealing with some people that are so reasonable or not. And oftentimes, and sometimes even the agents are afraid of the taxpayers. I had a case like that where I met an IRS agent in a client's place of business, and the place of business is like way out in the woods, like one of those horror movies where, some guy with an axe is chasing you. And I'll never forget, she said, "Would you mind staying here and watching me drive away before you leave?"
Wow.
So sure. So the bottom line is usually, because that's a question I get too, is, well, would they, who would they rather deal with? And the bottom line is, when we talk with them, we're going to present a legal case. Here is why you should grant me what I ask. But it's not, some tax protester argument. Obviously, there's no violence involved. It's based on the law and the facts. And here is what we should do. And over the years, sometimes you deal with the same people over and over again, and you know them, and you can make a good deal. And there's just so many things that you can do. Another thing that comes up all the time, suppose you're divorced, and suppose your former spouse was a no-good-nick. Sometimes I like to be impressive and throw in the Latin words. And this no-good-nick rang up a big tax bill, and you filed the joint return with a no-good-nick. Now, the general rule with a joint return is both parties are jointly and severally liable, which in English means they can collect it from either one of you. So if one of the parties was a stay-at-home spouse and the other party left the home to work, they could collect it from either spouse. And then it gets really tricky when, after the divorce, they marry somebody else, and now the IRS starts chasing spouse two for the taxes spouse one didn't pay. An interesting situation.
There's actually people who are the IRS are intimidated by.
Well, again, you have to remember that in no way, shape, or form should anybody have violence for anything. But what I'm saying is that when you deal with a group of people, when they're dealing with a tax attorney, there's no thought of, physical violence or shouting or unpleasantness. You present the law and the facts. And the IRS agent has to deal with taxpayers. There's even a category called dangerous taxpayers, where if the agent thinks they're a dangerous taxpayer, they refer to an IRS agent that brings a gun. So, I mean, this happens. That's a problem that they have. So the bottom line is, and that doesn't happen in most of the cases, so let's not worry about it. But let's assume you're the situation where your former spouse made you a tax problem and you filed a joint return. Are you stuck with it? No, you can ask for something called innocent spouse. What innocent spouse is all about is essentially it breaks down to, look, I didn't know about it. I didn't have benefit from it. This should be on the former spouse, not on me. And the government can grant you something called innocent spouse. Now you're off the hook. An example of that, suppose you had a gentleman that was married to a young lady, and the gentleman had his own auto repair business, and on the side he dealt cocaine, and he took his profits from the cocaine selling and spent the money on his own drugs and his mistress. That would be an example where the spouse would say, look, I didn't know about it. I didn't benefit from it. I shouldn't be stuck with it. And the government can grant you innocent spouse where you're off the hook. That's just
Right.
one of the many things that you can do.
Hey, Stephen, I want people to also understand, once you represent them, they don't have to talk to the IRS anymore.
That's right. That's one of the benefits. You don't talk to them, deal with them, excuse me, have anything to do with them. We want to do the whole job for you. Think about an IRS situation like a professional heavyweight boxing match. The IRS agent is a professional heavyweight fighter. Nobody but another heavyweight professional boxer better get in that ring with him.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's why it's so important to have someone like you to represent them. And I got to tell you, after listening to you, I can't believe how fast the show has gone by. You really, I'm so glad we have you. And you know what? You're gonna be with us again next month, and we'll also promote your show coming up in New York. But I've heard some things today that I've never heard before.
And I'm very much looking forward to appearing with you today, because we could really continue this subject with part 2, because there's so much in this area that we haven't even mentioned yet.
Well, first of all, let's give everybody your phone number and your website.
So you can call us toll free at 888 tax deal. That's 888 TAX DEAL 888 tax deal, or visit us online at moskowitzllp.com. MOSKOWITZLLP.com. And it's funny when I say this, when people first meet me, they think I'm joking, but after they know me for a while, they know I'm telling the truth. I just love talking about taxes. It gets me so excited and up, and boom, the time just goes.
Yeah, I can tell because I looked at the clock before, and it was we had about 12 minutes, and I just looked now and it's like, show's over with. I'm so glad you're going to be back with us again next.
But there's still a lot more to be said.
Oh, I know. Stephen Moskowitz, LLC.
LLP.
Stephen, have a wonderful, I don't know if you're Hanukkah or Christmas, probably Hanukkah, but have a
Well, I celebrate both of them.
Yeah, that's how I am too. Have a wonderful holiday, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much. I look forward to it.
Thank you. That's Stephen Moskowitz. He's an attorney. Oh my God, I got to tell you, we have a lot of tax relief attorneys across the country doing the show in different markets. But I got to tell you, this guy is hot. Stephen Moskowitz. So glad we have him. That's it for today. Rebel, thank you for such a great job. She always does a great job. We will be back with you again next week with more. That's the experts.
Thanks for tuning in today to the Ask the Expert show on W4CY Radio and Talk4 TV. Tune in next week and every week to hear more from our experts on personal injury, insurance, air condition repairs, estate planning, Medicare, and many other topics in the areas of legal, health, financial, and home improvement. See you next week.